Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the Johns Hopkins School of Education, Doctor of Philosophy and Education virtual webinar. My name is Tanya McMillan, and I am an admissions coordinator here at the School of Education. Also joining me today, I have my colleague from the Office of Admissions, and she will introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sion John, Assistant Director of Admissions here at the Johns Hopkins School of Education. Welcome.
We also have presenting today our PhD program lead, Dr. Hunter Gelbach, and current PhD students, Brianna Bostic and Jody Miller. Before we get started, I'd like to just cover a few housekeeping topics. First, today's webinar is being recorded. We will be able to share a link to the recording by email after the event is complete. Also, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat box and we will read and answer your questions. Next, I'd like to share the agenda for today's virtual webinar. We will begin the presentation sharing an overview of the Johns Hopkins School of Education. Then Dr. Gelbach will go over details of the Doctor of Philosophy program. And again, we will have two current PhD students joining us today, and they will talk about their journey at the School of Education. Lastly, we'll cover admission requirements and leave the floor open for questions at the end. I will begin with some quick facts about the Johns Hopkins School of Education. We are one of 9 schools at Johns Hopkins University. We began offering college courses for teachers in 1909 and then became our own school in 2007. We are proud to share that the Johns Hopkins School of Education is currently ranked one of the top schools in education by the U.S. News and World Report. For school enrollment, we have approximately 1,741 students enrolled and offer more than 25 graduate programs, which include doctoral, master's, and graduate certificate programs. We also have a strong network of over 24,000 SOE alums. Moving on to our faculty presenter, Dr. Hunter Gelbach is one of our PhD program leads at the Johns Hopkins University School of Education. He joined SOE in 2019 and received his PhD at Stanford University. Dr. Gelbach's research focuses on improving the social and motivational context of schools. Additionally, he received the Spencer Foundation Mid-Career Award in 2016. And before we review the program details of the PhD program, I would like to cover a frequently asked question. What is the difference between the EDD and the PhD program? To briefly summarize what's on the chart that you're seeing, our PhD program is a full-time, approximately 4-year program requiring residency, 4 to 5-year program requiring residency in Baltimore, Maryland. Typically, the program is designed for those who are pursuing research positions or continuing research and teaching at the college or university level. There's also a strong focus towards researching and contributing new information to the field of education. On the other hand, our EDD program is a part-time online program. Completion time is approximately 4 years, and this program is designed for individuals who are practitioners within their fields. Most EDD programs are focused on preparing students for administrative leadership roles. The EDD program includes, but of course not limited to, leadership in higher educational institutions, school districts, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and private sector positions. Typically, EDD students choose to narrow their studies to something directly applicable to their current job or a role they are aspiring to obtain. At this time, I will hand the floor over to Dr. Gelbach to discuss the details of the PhD program. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Gelbach.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate the introduction, Tanya. I don't know if you guys can tweak the video, but I'm happy to have the camera turned on in the remote chance that anyone wants to see me. So huge thanks to all of you for joining us today. Really excited to be here and to talk about the program. I always think it's useful to kind of like start with the end in mind. So, you know, what's the big kind of long-term program objective. And, you know, for pretty much all our students, it is to think about an ultimate job, you know, a faculty position potentially, but educational research in some form. So this could be, you know, at research centers, at policy think tanks, faculty positions, obviously. Every once in a while, like State Department of Education kind of thing. But that's kind of the long-term vision. But on the other hand, that's really just sort of the instrumental goal. What may be sort of more interesting is like, how do we position you to win these types of jobs? And we really think of this as a program that is applied educational research, right? So it's not the kind of program, there I am, that's just research for research sake. We really want to have all our students and the faculty very much same thing. You know, we want to have real world impact on real problems. So how do we think about training that, training toward that end? You know, I think it's fair to say that a lot of our sort of trickiest, thorniest problems in education right now are tough enough that you're not going to make a ton of progress on them with just one sort of disciplinary angle on it. And so we really do take an intradisciplinary approach and emphasize training in research methods in particular. So that I think at the highest level is sort of what you should be thinking about in terms of what's distinctive about Johns Hopkins, is really this emphasis on you know, improving educational practice and policy, particularly with an eye toward focusing on underserved students, big emphasis on research methods, and an interdisciplinary program. So then, you know, as we sort of drill down in that on that a little bit further, okay, so you're saying, Hunter, there's an emphasis on practice and policy. What does that mean? And that it's interdisciplinary. So I think a pretty reasonable way to think about not everyone in the program, but a lot of people, is that they're focusing maybe a little bit more on one of two core sort of disciplines, one being learning sciences or educational psychology, and the other being sort of sociology of education. We have sort of deeper faculty bench strength on those two. And then always with a goal toward impacting educational policy or practice. And so as you think about sort of whether this feels like a fit for you, you should know a couple things. One is that, and we'll actually see an example of this later, not everyone fits this mold. You know, we've had one woman who just actually got a job at Vanderbilt in an anthropology department. So she was, you know, coming at it from a little bit of a different disciplinary lens, still with that emphasis on sort of what does this discipline have to say about educational practice and policy. So there are some exceptions, but as you're thinking about whether this is likely a fit for you, just super helpful to reach out to faculty members. Like if you scroll through our PhD faculty webpage, and just get a little feel for kind of who's who, what kind of research is happening, and then reach out to someone whose interests seem to align with yours. You know, we do take this sort of apprenticeship model pretty seriously. And so you'll be spending a lot of time working pretty closely with a single advisor, maybe a couple advisors. And so, you know, doing your homework now and figuring out if this seems like a good fit from your perspective, from their perspective, I think is time well worth taking. All right, so shifting gears then, couple just sort of nuts and bolts features about the program. Most people are finishing kind of 4 to 5 years. The tuition that is funded for 4 years fully. Increasingly though, I think we're finding that a lot of students figure out ways to fund themselves for a 5th year, or their advisors get a grant and they work on that grant a little bit, maybe in years 2 and 3, and then that can kind of roll over basically and get them a 5th year if they want. All of this is with health insurance and vision and dental. And there is a requirement to complete 2 teaching assistantships. We feel like even for those folks who end up going off to a sort of research think tank, there's so much of education and educational research that involves sort of explaining to other people and teaching that this is a really valuable skill. And so hence our eagerness to develop it in all our graduates. One thing before we leave this slide, one thing I really want to underscore and emphasize, because I think it's important, as I'm sure many of you are going to have, you know, hard decisions between a number of excellent programs. The big difference between our program and not all, but a lot of other programs is that the funding is not contingent, right? So it's not like you're TAing in order to get your funding. You don't have to go work on someone's research project to get the funding. So it's really opens people up a lot more. You're very free in terms of how you want to spend your time. There is absolutely the expectation that you'll work closely with your advisor and he or she will get you involved with some research kind of right off the bat. But if there's a more appealing research project down the hall and you want to go work on that and you kind of work it out with your advisor, you know, it's very open. You're not again, the funding is not contingent. So useful thing to consider as you're sort of weighing your options. All right, so thinking about the program then, you know, again, kind of nuts and bolts stuff here, minimum of 72 credits. I will say that almost every single student, because a master's degree is required, almost every single student transfers in 12 credits from their master's degree to fulfill part of those 72 credits. So I typically, and you can ask Jody and Brianna when they pop on in a few minutes here, but I feel like typically this is not the big hurdle for students. Most people kind of trip over the coursework and there's enough good stuff that you'd want to take that this tends to be not a big deal at all. All right, so then next, in terms of the coursework itself, I did mention an emphasis on research methods. And so you see this sort of borne out in the credit hours you're supposed to take. So 18 credit hours there. There are 5 different core seminars. One is sort of the ed psych, science of learning kind of oriented. I'm actually teaching that right now. There's one that is more sort of interdisciplinary, but thinking about you know, sort of schools and society, what's their role? So maybe a little bit of a sociological orientation there. There's a policy class, there's a sociocultural class, and then the one that's supposed to kind of tie it all together is how schools work. And then beyond that, you know, you're thinking about electives and dissertation credits and readings. So it's much more open-ended after those sort of 18 research credits and 15 credit hours in the core seminars. Lots of flexibility on both the dissertation research credits and your electives. So then let's shift on to milestones. Basically, your first 2 years are much more heavily focused on coursework. And then typically that sort of, you know, early summer after year 2 is when most people are taking comprehensive exams. So those do need to get wrapped up before you start year 3. Typically sometime during that 3rd year is when you do a dissertation proposal defense or a proposal hearing. And then, you know, depending on if you're sort of more on the 4-year track or the 5-year track, you'll complete the actual dissertation defense. And both the proposal and the final dissertation defense have an oral and a written component. And actually same thing for the comprehensive exams, oral and written component. So those are kind of the major benchmarks that folks work on as they're coming through. So again, first couple of years heavier on coursework, and the latter years more focused on these benchmarks. Just to give a little flavor of some of the, and this is kind of historical, you know, dissertation studies that we've seen happen over time. And actually this first one is good, not only because it is Jody Miller's, who you'll hear from in a moment. But her work on stress, you'll see actually pretty well differentiated by the semicolons there, is going to take the arc of 3 papers. So it's not a book kind of dissertation, but it's a 3-paper dissertation. And increasingly, we see a lot of students opting for that because it can help facilitate publication later. So maybe if you could turn to the next slide, I think that'll help people follow along on the dissertation studies. Thank you, lovely. So that's, one example. There are a couple others here, everything from exploring barriers to research use to thinking about vision and how, like, gosh, it's really hard to learn if you can't see the chalkboard. And so a student in actually a pretty large research team that she was part of had this really neat study where they gave glasses to students, and lo and behold, it turns out if you can see, you can learn better. I won't read all of these to you, but my hope is really that in showing these off to you guys, you can see both a little bit of the methodological diversity. So there are some people out there collecting their own original data. There are some people using big data sets, but also especially that you can see the practical implications and why this stuff would matter, not only for sort of like improvements in theory and helping us think about psychologically what's going on with students, sociologically what's going on in schools, and what policy implications those might have. But yeah, just the real on the ground practical implications, both for policymakers and for practitioners. So with that, let's pivot to the next slide, where we can see a tiny bit of like what our grads have actually gone on to do. And I sort of indicated early on that, it's this sort of range from research, educational research, think tank kinds of places to faculty positions. And so here's Rebecca Gamez, who has just started her first year, I think, actually, at Vanderbilt. She's in the anthropology department. And so I think she graduated maybe 2 years ago. She had an interim teaching position locally, I think. So this is actually her second faculty position. Suyun just graduated this past May and is now a postdoc at the University of Virginia. And Amanda is actually a research professor here. She was so great, we couldn't let her go. She's actually the one who did the eyeglasses study that I just alluded to. So anyway, that's a little bit of a cross section, but these are typically kind of where people end up after graduating from here. And so next, on the next slide, I want to call your attention to just sort of one more way to underscore this sort of research and practice balance that we have. And so what you're seeing on the screen right now, younger students were among those most hurt during the pandemic, is a pretty recent, like I think maybe just about a year ago, op-ed that 2 of our doctoral students wrote together. They just sort of teamed up, were interested in this issue, and got it published in the Hechinger report, right? So this is not an academic journal. It is, with all due respect to my academic colleagues, right? It's something that actual practitioners and policymakers read. Not that academic journal articles aren't riveting. So next, if we advance the slide, you'll see another example, slightly different. This one is a collaboration between a recent grad and a former faculty member here. And, just kind of a nice way to note that, and this is an academic journal article, but a nice way to note that, like, even once you're graduated from here, it's not like you stop collaborating with your advisors. I think we have a pretty good, strong track record from that. All right, so let's keep going. The next one is, again, you will meet her momentarily, but very excited about the work that Jody Miller is doing. So this is one of our current students who developed pretty much all by herself. I think a little engineering help maybe from a friend, but an app that that's designed to help younger students just sort of check in, let the teacher know how they're feeling that day. And it's done so well and gotten picked up by so many schools. It got covered locally in the press in Baltimore. Hopkins is various entities around Hopkins have written it up. The dean even gave her an opportunity to present on this to the National Advisory Council. So our sort of external committee that helps shape the direction of the school. You can see a little bit of what the app looks like up there. So anyway, I'll stop talking since you'll hear more from Jody in a sec. Next one that I wanted to highlight and profile, this is back to the glasses study. And this is a nice way of seeing that, like, not only is Amanda part of this like big team, but it's interdisciplinary, right? You got a bunch of people there from over at the med school, from over at the School of Public Health, big, famous academic article actually over in medicine, JAMA. But on the next, advancing the slide, you'll see this gets covered by EdWeek, one of the bigger outlets. So another sort of nice way in which faculty members are getting their work out there is, doing interviews with journalists. And last, just a neat thing that came out just this year. Again, 2 of our graduate students who decided to team up together. I always love it because these are cross cohort, so you're not locked into just kind of knowing the people who come in your same year, but it's a small program. And so Paula and Logan are actually different years in the program. But, super policy relevant, right? Urban Institute puts out kind of white papers and policy briefs that legislators pick up on. And so they commissioned Paula and Logan to write one up on the topic you see there in front of you. So anyway, I won't beat a dead horse, but I think we do a great job of sort of this blending of good research from a theory kind of perspective and good research from a impacting the real world kind of perspective. So with that, let me sort of wrap up. I think to me, one of the biggest, most important things as you're sort of thinking through the PhD landscape is it's really about fit. And so these are my sort of top 5, like, hey, if this is what you're looking for, I think Hopkins is a pretty good fit for you. And so number 1, if you're looking for an apprenticeship experience, but also one that balances and is complemented by a small cohort, right? So you will undoubtedly work closely with a couple advisors, but you're gonna also have this pretty close cohort experience of, about 25 to 30 other peers in the program at different years. And I think we have a great track record of the, more senior doctoral, more senior PhD students helping out and mentoring with the earlier career ones. So apprenticeship experience, if you're looking for an interdisciplinary approach, we talked about that before, but I think that's really big. If you're looking for rigorous methodological training, that's huge. We are, to be completely honest and fair, probably a bit more quantitatively oriented than qualitatively oriented, but a lot of our students end up in more of a sort of mixed method direction because we do have good faculty strength on both of those fronts. More of the core courses and required courses tend to be a little bit more quantitative. And then this one needs a little unpacking. You want to learn research approaches of the future. So one of the other, I think, real hallmarks and calling cards of the program is that there's really good faculty expertise and really, I think Hopkins is way out ahead of most other places on this idea of open science. So being open and transparent about the processes that you're engaging in, how you're doing your analyses, all these sorts of things. And the reason there's a big deal is because for arguably far too long, I think researchers have taken advantage of computing and running this analysis and that analysis and by all means, we should thoroughly analyze our data, but at the same time, we definitely should not be torturing our data so much that it tells us what we want to hear. And so where is the delicate balance between those two? Well, I think for far too long, educational researchers have sort of landed on kind of the wrong side of that. It's so easy to run a couple extra analyses on your, using a computer with statistical software, that people are finding these chance findings and trying to make a big deal about them as though they really found something. And so open science thinks really hard about like, well, can you replicate that finding? Do you state your hypothesis up front before you've even looked at your data? And those kinds of techniques really put a big check on not only sort of whether your study works or your intervention is valid, but it's a huge help to practitioners, because if they read something that a study that has been pre-registered or replicated, they can have that much more faith that it's a real finding. And so I think there's a lot of the world of education that's just catching up. But if this sounds appealing, right, that you don't want to be engaging in research that comes up with these chance findings and you want real stuff, I think that's another good sign that this program is a good fit for you. All right. Lastly, you want to make a big impact on educational practice and policy by having this bridging kind of research that speaks both to theory and to practice. A lot of the way this happens around here at Hopkins is through research practice partnerships, which I think we have really good strength in. So, all right, on the next slide, you'll see some of our lovely current students. And this is a good excuse for me to stop talking and introduce you to Brianna first, and Jody, who can tell you a little bit about their pathways and journeys here and what they're studying. And so with that, I will say welcome to Brianna, who I also have to note has just landed a lovely, lovely grant, fellowship, I should say, sorry, from the Administration for Children and Families, which is a division of Health and Human Services. So A, big congratulations, and B, a big welcome. Thanks for joining us, Brianna.
Thank you so much, Hunter. I really appreciate that. And it's wonderful to have you all here. I'm going to speak a little bit about my experience in the program. I'll say that my research is focused on early childhood education, both in children's social and emotional development, as well as teacher well-being in early childhood settings. And my dissertation topic is about the geographic context of teachers' work and what that means for how they share their experiences about teachers' job, about their job demands and their job resources and the quality of the classroom. And for choosing this program, I was interested in the faculty. I liked that there was a diversity of interests across faculty members and that they worked both together and with stakeholders, both in Baltimore City and the state of Maryland. The location worked for me, but I'll admit that I grew up in Maryland. And so it was just a great way for me to both benefit from the program offerings and stay close to friends and family. So I'll be honest about that. And I also like the flexibility of the program generally, both in the work that you have access to do. So as Hunter mentioned before, reaching out to faculty members based on what their current work is ongoing, if you want to do that, or working more heavily with your advisor to finish up manuscripts and projects. I found that I've been able to do both, but I'm also in my 5th year. So maybe if you want a shorter timeline, you would do it differently. But I feel like, if it's worth doing, it's worth getting as much as you can out of the program. And so for my highlights, I have loved working in the WELL lab, the Wellbeing for Early Learning lab. I work with Jody and have seen how WellCheck has grown from its inception. It's been amazing to see, and witnessing things like that, I think, are a wonderful part of being in this program. And my tips for you is to be yourself. And I think if you're looking to develop relationships with people, in Baltimore, you'll come across people who do all kinds of work professionally, and as a part of maybe nonprofit work or community service work. So just think about who you like to build more relationships with and spend time with them, attend their meetings, attend the things that they invite you to, and they will. And leave yourself time to think and plan how you want to navigate the program. And then what are some of your professional and personal goals as you leave? I thought it was really great coming in that I saw people who were single, people who are married, people who had kids, and there was a range of ages. So it kind of let me know that no matter where my life was going or what direction it took, that I'd be supported not only by peers, but also by people in the program who understands that, you know, you're living your life and you're also getting this degree, and it's like a holistic development as a person experience. And that's all I have to say. I look forward to questions.
Hi, all. I can jump in. It's so nice to meet you all. My name is Jody. Thank you, Hunter and Bree, for the kind words. So I focus on stress and I have well check, and I'm happy to talk about both of those. But I think what I really have enjoyed about my experience at Hopkins is having the ability to be kind of innovative and entrepreneurial. I didn't initially set out with that mindset at all. I was a teacher and I loved thinking about stress and how we could support students. And WellCheck kind of came naturally from inspiration from my advisor. And I've been working on it now for 2 years. So I feel really grateful that I've had a lot of support from my peers, but also the dean, as Hunter mentioned, Hunter himself and other faculty, to continue both working on my PhD and WellCheck, as they're somewhat related, but not totally overlapping, which is also nice. One thing I really liked about Hopkins, which drew me in, was the emphasis on policy and this idea of an entrepreneurial spirit. And I don't mean that in terms of WellCheck itself. I mean, there's this culture around kind of going after what you're interested in. And as Hunter mentioned, we have this apprenticeship model where you work really closely with a faculty member, but you also get to work with other faculty members who are working on projects that are of interest. And that's pretty special because in some programs, you're kind of really locked into one person. And so that room for innovation and growth, I think, is a real strength of our program. And as Hunter also mentioned, we focus really on policy and thinking about this, like, practical aspects of our work. And so that's similarly my highlight. I've been able to do lots of different things during my time, which has been wonderful. And then we really get a great methods training. So one thing I feel really grateful for is, as I'm a 5th year, and as I think about what comes next, I feel confident that I have a lot of different statistical analyses in my toolkit that I can use whenever I need it. And as far as thinking about your future, I think a lot of the things Hunter mentioned are helpful and important, but I would also say person over place. So you're going to be working closely with your advisor and with your peers. And so to the extent that you get a sense of, this is a person who I think will support me professionally and personally, that is really important. Whereas going somewhere that might be really exciting in some ways, but not have someone who you feel like will actually be there to kind of mentor you, I would argue the latter option is less desirable. So I think that's mostly my spiel, but I'm happy to field questions with Bree later.
All right, thank you, everyone. So now we're going to continue by going over the application requirements. Applicants must submit a completed application, which can be found on our school's website. Keep in mind, there is an $80 application fee when you submit your application. You'll also need an updated resume. Your personal statement should not exceed more than 750 words. In addition to the personal statement, a writing sample must be submitted, and this would be a sample of your most professional writing that demonstrates your analytic and critical writing skills. Moving on, you should plan on submitting 3 letters of recommendation. It is recommended that these letters should include at least the following: 2 submitted by faculty members who are familiar with your previous academic work, and 1 by a supervisor or administrator who has been in a position to evaluate your professional development. We'll need official GRE scores and official transcripts. And please keep in mind, we will need all official transcripts, including institutions you may have taken courses but did not receive a degree. And lastly, an interview may be required. The application deadline date is December 15, 2022. Keep in mind all materials, including official transcripts, letters of recommendation, test scores must be received by the admissions office on or before the December 15, 2022 deadline for full consideration. And there are a few additional steps you need to take in order to complete the application process. If you're an international student, you must submit a TOEFL or IELTS score. And please note, if you hold qualifying degrees or have earned credits from institutions outside the US, you must have your academic records evaluated by an accredited independent credential evaluation agency before you can be considered for admission to the PhD program. And additional information can be found on our school's website. And for tuition, please know all PhD students at SOE are eligible for a fellowship for up to 4 years. The fellowship includes a yearly stipend and will cover tuition and fees. The fellowship will also cover individual health, dental, and vision insurance. And lastly, you must be registered full-time and be in good academic standing every semester to continue to be eligible for the fellowship. And if you're interested in applying for financial aid, we strongly encourage you to apply for financial aid when you start your application. The School of Education offers a limited number of partial need-based institutional scholarships each year. SOE's endowed scholarship awards range on average from $800 to $3,000 per semester and are applied to tuition expenses beginning in the fall semester. To see if you qualify for the endowed scholarship, please visit the grants and scholarship webpage on the school's website. Thank you for attending the Doctor of Philosophy virtual webinar. At this time, we would like to open up the floor for questions.
Great, thanks so much. And I think we've got one already, but yeah, keep them coming. Question about whether or not the GRE is waived. No, it is not at this point. And honestly, I don't think there are any plans to in the near future. So, you know, more data is generally preferable, I think, is kind of how the admissions committee feels. So please do send in those GRE scores as well. All right, currently a teacher, instructional coach in Korea. What advice do you have for practitioners who are interested in transitioning to an educational research path? Other than my master's studies, I don't have formal research, so I'm concerned won't be as competitive. Awesome question. All right, so we do get a lot of people who have more of a practitioner background. And essentially what we're trying to suss out and get a good feel for is sort of your potential and your promise as a researcher. And so whether you are sort of talking about some of those experiences as a practitioner through a research lens, as though you are really interested in sort of asking research questions about this practical experience that you've had, or whether you can pick up on something from your master's study. I think that the key to a more competitive application is really sort of thinking in terms of research questions, and particularly research questions that are going to be a good fit for you and a particular advisor. Well, let me pause there though and invite Jody or Bree. Would you anything to add or say differently on that one?
No, you know, when I came into the program, I remember, now I'm not sure how the application has changed or how what make the competitive profile has changed, but because it's been a few years.
Mhm.
But there were many people who were teachers in the classroom when I came in, and it was also looked upon as a great thing to have or to have experience with. So I think having experience as a practitioner makes you an even stronger applicant, because the way that you think through problem solving, or how you, if you're writing a manuscript, how you write the discussion could change, because you're thinking about maybe your own experiences, the ones of your peers. So don't shy away from applying because you're in the classroom. I think that's excellent.
Yeah, I second that. I was also a teacher before I started my program. So I think that just writing a compelling reason why you'd like to make the transition, with whom you'd like to work, and what are your research questions, and perhaps even like what's the inspiration for them, I think will be a great way to kind of talk about why you bring such a wealth of experience.
Great. All right. Kind of trying to thank you both. Trying to keep up with the chat here. I think the next question is maybe more an admissions question. Seon or Tanya, do you guys want to handle that one?
Sure. The question is, if my undergraduate degree does not meet the 3.0 requirement, but has a very good GPA for master's, am I eligible to apply? The answer is yes. We do have, the applications are looked at by the PhD faculty committee holistically. So we do still encourage you to apply regardless of your GPA in your undergrad program.
And also just know, right, it's one of the assets of being a small program is we can really evaluate at an individual level. So, you know, very open to their, you know, scores or, you know, grades or whatever it is, not being great in one area, you know, easy to have compensatory assets in another area that would make up for that. All right, types of master's degrees that are considered relevant. Would one in a research academic subject outside of education work, right? So we're in great question. So we are this interdisciplinary program. So we are definitely used to thinking in different ways. And so I think it would easily be considered an asset if you made sort of a good, compelling tie to why, you know, this background in X made a ton of sense and had a lot to bring to the table for education, for practice, for policy. And then, you know, once you get here, you're going to get exposure to other sorts of disciplines and other takes on it. So I think you could easily, in a research statement, frame that as a big asset. I think the mistake would be to, you know, just assume that other people can see the connection for how, you know, your master's degree in underwater basket weaving is totally relevant and germane to education. Like, go ahead and make that connection for us. And I think, you know, if you do a compelling job of that, it'll be at least as, if not more compelling than someone who has a master's degree in education from a school of education. All right. Let's see, next one. As interdisciplinary work is inspired, can we work on different areas than our master's thesis? Absolutely. So a lot of people will do a master's thesis in, you know, certain areas, but then decide that the big thing they learned was that that wasn't the area for them. I think in particular, I think what we do see a fair bit of is, you know, I had a master's thesis, a master's degree that was very much oriented toward being a practitioner. And then, you know, after being a practitioner for a few years, people see, you know, a set of problems out there in the world and really want to feel like they could have more impact on the world by doing some research to address that problem. And so in those instances, often, you know, the master's degree is maybe a teacher preparation degree. And that, you know, once they get here to the PhD level, they really want to study something that, you know, is much more research oriented in focus. All right, so if I hold a master's degree from a US institution, can the requirement for the TOEFL be waived? Admissions, I will hand that one off to you.
Yeah, so if there is, if you did receive your master's from a U.S. institution, there is within the application form a TOEFL waiver, and you can fill that out. And also we will review your official transcripts as well, to verify that information. So definitely make sure that we have all of your transcripts, undergraduate and graduate as well.
Another good question. What types of teaching and TA opportunities are there for PhD students? Jody and Brianna, do you want to talk from personal experience about kind of what you've done and then what you've seen cohort mates and others in the program do?
Sure. So the policy is a little bit different when Bree and I first started, but I got to TA actually for my advisor's class, which was HLM, hierarchical linear model, so a methods class. But I've seen people TA in other departments, even in other parts of the university. They've TA'd for online classes, in-person classes, master level classes, EDD classes. So what's nice is you can find a bunch of areas that you're interested in or excited about and TA for them. And even in some cases teach, although I think that often tends to be less common.
I agree with that. There are lots of opportunities to TA. I was a TA for the Science of Learning class, and I think there may be some opportunities across the university to do TA work in the summer. So you can look at that too.
Great. Any other questions that folks want to think through, investigate, have Jody or Bree chat about?
Thank you, Dr. Gelbach, Jody, and Brianna. And while we wait for some more questions, we do have some frequently asked questions that are asked in the Office of Admissions. The first one, Dr. Gelbach, is what's the maximum number of students admitted annually?
There's not sort of an official maximum number, but typically we try to average about 5 folks per cohort. So each year, 5 new folks, and sometimes we're a little higher than that, sometimes a little lower, but that's kind of the working average that we typically think about.
That looks like we have a question.
Yeah, maybe I'll take this one just because I'm an educational psychologist. So yeah, if you think your interest moving forward is in educational psychology, but don't have a deep background in that, I think it's similar to some of the other questions we've gotten, which is, to what extent can you apply your past experiences and past academic background to education? And there might be really neat connections that we in an interdisciplinary program would get excited about. But there may also be ways to sort of assume that other people will connect the dots for you that seem less compelling. So I think if you've taken a class in educational psychology and sort of feel like this might be where my passion is, but can describe a little bit more about kind of why you're passionate in a particular topic, what research questions you'd want to be asking, and why this program sort of makes a lot of sense. That kind of an argument, I think, is likely to be quite compelling. So as long as you're sort of connecting the dots for people as to why this somewhat new direction makes a lot of sense for you. Question about sort of when to connect with faculty members and when you should start kind of having Zoom calls and getting to know them. Jody, Brianna, I don't know if you guys remember when you were at this phase, but when did you, if you remember, when did you start reaching out to other faculty folks, both at Hopkins and other schools you were looking at?
Yes, so I did not. I'll let Jody tell the story maybe of how she did things in a more organized fashion. I did not reach out to faculty members until after I had already applied to the school, because I was teaching at the time and I was also in a master's program. And so honestly, I was just very busy. And I didn't have like a schema for what was the norm. I was just like doing what I had time to do and trying to make the due dates for what was necessary, like the GRE, and get my application submitted on time. And so when I reached out to faculty members and students, and like the waiting period time though, between applying and figuring out if I had gotten in or given an opportunity to visit, I still found everybody to be really friendly to speak to. And I didn't have, I had some specific interests, but I was more interested in hearing how they were experiencing the program, the support, relationships with colleagues, how they felt about their job search, what was the reputation for the program having people employed afterwards. So I was kind of asking more structural questions about their experience. And in terms of when is an appropriate time to reach out, though, I will let Jody tell about her experience.
I did a mix. So some schools like were pretty clear that they don't recommend that you reach out. I did a bunch of reach out in, I guess, in the late summer, early fall as I was applying, so around now. But I would say I didn't find that particularly fruitful. A lot of people don't get back to you just because they have so many prospective students reaching out to them. Or if they did, it was kind of like, thank you for your interest. Like, we hope to see you here next fall, in a very kind of like non-committal, loose way. So you can try. There should be one thing that would be really helpful is if you, because I didn't know this when I was applying, is there are ways to figure out if people are accepting students. And that's a really good like Hunter question or program director question at other institutions, because you don't want to waste time and money on an application for someone who's not accepting students. So, and then if you are sending that email, you could potentially ask them what their kind of policy is on reaching out. But you can always try. It'll be medium fruitful, I would say, on average, but it's worth it. I would also recommend talking to their students. So actually, one thing that might be more fruitful is when you're asking someone like, can you connect me with one of your students? Then like, they don't have to like take time out of their schedule necessarily, but you can still get the benefit of learning from their students.
And I'll just chime in with, I think our faculty are typically pretty open. I can't speak to how responsive they are. I think pretty responsive. And so but you know, the door is definitely open. I think Raven is not on the call, but Raven is kind of the program guru who knows all the ins and outs of the program. And so if you're interested in chatting with a student who's in so-and-so's lab, just reach out to Raven or me and we'll get you connected and allow you to kind of have that conversation or swap a few questions over email. But that should be for sure something we ought to be able to hook you up with.
Also, sorry, Hunter, really quickly, one thing I think is really important is to talk to students before you commit to a program, or even before you apply, because we have a lot of insight into things that you won't necessarily hear at some of these sessions, and about like aspects of the culture and the social life and other things that may be really important to you. So it's worth trying to reach out to grad students. I'm generally sure happy to talk and have valuable insight that you won't get anywhere else necessarily.
Yeah, I would maybe advocate, try the advisor first. And if it's, you know, taking a little while, then figure out, and again, we can help with this, kind of who a relevant student or two might be. And between those two, you should hopefully get a pretty reasonable feel. Yeah, I think good strategizing, Jody. Thank you. Oh, actually, let me say one other thing, which is, and Seon, you can help with the date. I want to say it's November 17th. November 15th.
It's November 15 from 3 to 4 p.m.
Yeah, we're going to do a whole session that is more oriented towards strategizing. Although at that point, it's pretty close to the due date. So it's a little more like strategizing around your application. So if you want to come back and get, you know, words of wisdom from students, words of wisdom from kind of what we're looking for from an admissions committee perspective, we do definitely encourage you to come back for another round there. That'll be less about the sort of nuts and bolts. You might do a couple of those nuts and bolts quickly, but it'll mostly be about like, hey, you know, should I write my essay more like this or more like that? You know, what tends to get the admissions committee excited between X, Y, or Z sort of options, those types of things.
Thank you, Dr. Gelback. I think we have one last question there. It looks like it's more of an admissions and maybe related question. Roughly how many students apply each year? So on average, we get about 65 to 70 viable applications every year for the PhD program. So if we don't have any more questions, it's coming close to the end. We do thank you all for joining us today for the Doctor of Philosophy and Education, PhD webinar. Thank you, Dr. Gelbach, and thank you to Brianna and Jody as well. You'll see my contact information, Tanya McMillan, up there for any admissions related queries. And as Dr. Gelbach mentioned, for anything program related, specific to the PhD program, please reach out to Raven Minervino. Again, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for taking the time. Look forward to hearing from you and seeing your applications in December.